Welcome everyone to session 2 of this 3-part Inkscape tutorial series. We left off with video 1 creating our shadow dot layer as we were making our template. One final step to do for the shadow dots before we move on to the next task of creating our template is to make all of these shadow dots gray. Right now they're black, so if we were to make black text on top of this, we would not be able to tell which are shadow dots and which is a real braille. So we want to make these shadow dots lighter so we can tell which layer we're on and which is which. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking on the text tool in our tool column on the left of the screen. Right in the middle is our little capital A, that's our text tool. Click that. And then click anywhere on our shadow dots. Make sure the shadow dot layer is unlocked with that little padlock icon next to the shadow dot layer that's unlocked. And then click anywhere on the shadow dots and Control A on your keyboard to select them all. We're going to make this gray now. So go to our color bar down at the bottom of the screen. My preference is 40% gray. You might like something else, but I'm going to make it 40% gray just for the demo. And now they are 40% gray, and I'm going to lock it just for the moment. So I'm going to go back over to the shadow dot layer, click on that little padlock, lock it. Now I can't do anything with this shadow dot layer, and you notice that it is lighter now. It's a light gray, 40%. And now we're going to go to another layer. Well, at this point, you may want to create a 5th layer called the Braille page layer. I've already done that here, but you can do that by clicking the little plus sign down almost at the bottom of the layers dialog, the object dialog, the little plus sign, and then rename it whatever you want to name it. I've named it Braille page because that makes sense to me, but if you want to name it something else, that's fine. So I'm going to go to my Braille page layer now, make sure it's unlocked with that little padlock. And now I'm going to create the running head and the page numbers at the corners of the Braille page. My shadow dots are not going to move because I locked them. So for right now, I want my text tool again. Click that if you need to. And then at the lower left of the first cell in the first line on your shadow dot layer, click there. So right here, I don't know if you can see it, but right at the lower left of that first cell on that first line, I'm going to click. And then I'm going to type using the ASCII code that's in the back of the handout. So to create the Braille for capital R running head, capital H head, then I want the comma on the keyboard, R, U, N, N. ING is a contraction, and there's no alphabetic equivalent to that. So I need to use an ASCII key for that, and that is the plus sign on your keyboard. So Shift plus, the plus is just to the left of your backspace key. Space, comma again for the capital indicator. H is just a regular H. EA contraction is the number 1 key on your keyboard because that is .2. It's a dropped 1. So 1 creates EA, and then D is just a regular D on your keyboard. And that we have running head. Next, click on your selection arrow on your tools. That's the top black arrow at the top of the tool column here. Click that. It selects our Braille running head and puts a text box around it. All those little black markers around the Braille means that there's a text box around it now. And I'm going to zoom into this so I can see it better. If you recall from video 1, the 3 key on the keyboard is going to zoom way into whatever it is I'm selected. So I'm going to press my 3 key and we're going to zoom way into that Braille. Too far. So I'm going to zoom out again a little bit by clicking or pressing my minus key on my keyboard. That's better. And now my running head braille is still selected. You can see the black markers around it with the text box. I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge the braille onto the shadow dots until they match. So as you can see, this is why we made the shadow dots gray before, so we can match our black braille onto the gray shadow dots. So I'm going to press my arrow keys a bit until I get mostly onto the gray shadow dots. That looks pretty good. And then press 5 on my keyboard to zoom back out to the whole page. So I'm going to press 5, and there we are. Now unlock the shadow dots. We locked them temporarily, but we're going to unlock them now so that I can select them. I still have my selector tool clicked, and I'm going to draw a bounding box, a marquee all the way around my shadow dots and that braille that I just brailled. So click and drag from upper left to lower right. And as you can see, I now have markers all around the shadow dots. Next, we need to open up another dialog over here. We have layers dialog right now, which I think is for under the object. I might be getting my programs confused. Let me check. View, see object. Yes, I was right. So we have objects right now, which is on the layers section over on my dialog box. So, but for right now, I want a new dialog box over there called Align and Distribute. So it's almost at the bottom of the object menu. Click Align and Distribute. And now I have a new dialog box over here on the right. I still have my shadow dots and my braille selected. I want to center that running head now. By the way, if you're not familiar with a running head is, you see it all the time in print books. We just tend to ignore it, so maybe you haven't noticed it before. But it's usually at the top of the page, usually centered in print, and it might say the title of the book or the title of the chapter or unit or something like that. A running head is not required in Braille, but it can be very helpful, especially if you have a student with a lot of worksheets, or you have the transcriber, has several books going at the same time. Which book is which? You can look at the running head and tell what you're working with, but it's not required. So you could ignore this whole running head process that I'm talking about, but I'm showing it to you because I use running heads all the time, and you may want to use them as well. So back to our Align and Distribute, go to the Align section of the Align and Distribute dialog, and there's a drop-down menu. The default, I believe, is page. That's not going to work for us because our shadow dots are not quite in the middle of the page, because we've allowed for binding on the left side. So we want, I think, either biggest object, which is the shadow dots block that we just selected, or I would suggest using the selection area we've just selected. So in our case, I believe the biggest object and the selection area are the same, but I prefer the selection area in general just because that works best with tactile graphics. So I'm going to click selection area, and then all of these little chiclets, I read somebody referred them to, that's kind of cute, but these little icons, and you'll find uses probably for all of these eventually, but we're going to focus right now on just the middle 4 of these. And right now, I just want to click the center on vertical axis so that Braille will be centered on the vertical middle of the shadow dots, hopefully. So click that. And you'll notice that the running head braille has now moved back to the middle of the page, almost. It's not quite laying on our shadow dots. So back to our layers. You can either do that by object and then click object in the menu, or in my case, somehow the dialog boxes have been stacked on top of each other. So I have these arrows left and right of the words align and distribute. So I'm going to click the black one here. That other one is grayed out. And I'm back to my layers dialog. Now I want to lock the shadow dots again because I don't want them to move while I do the next step. Leave the braille page layer alone. We're going to zoom back into the words running head so that we can match them up to the shadow dots underneath. So click 3 to zoom into an object that's selected, and this is selected. You can see the black markers all around. Click 3. Oh, that didn't work. Try this again. 3, there we go. 3, and then that's too far, so I'm going to zoom out again by hitting my minus key just once. And I'm going to shift my words running head just a little bit to the left here for me. They're not going to match exactly, but just as best as I can. That's probably pretty good right there. And then 5 on my keyboard, press it once to zoom back out to the whole page. That's the running head. We're going to repeat this process almost exactly for the braille page numbers and the print page numbers. Let's do the print page numbers first since we're focused on this first line of shadow dots. And we want 5 cells for the print pages because we might go into the 100s and we might have continuing pages, A100, B100, C100, etc. So let's reserve 5 cells for ourselves to make the print page numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. Oh, I forgot. Click on the text tool, which is that little capital A over on the left side of the screen. Now we count for ourselves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And right here, just click. And A100 in ASCII is going to be the letter A on the keyboard. And then the number sign is Shift 3. And then A for 1, J for 0, and J again for 0. And you can see it's not lining up with the shadow dots. So again, we're going to zoom back in, press 3 on your keyboard. Oops, you will do this a lot. You forget to click your tool first, and that's okay. You can always just undo it or backtrack. So okay, I click my selection tool. All my markers are there. That's in the box, and now I'm going to press 3 on my keyboard. Ooh, way too far in, way too close, and click or press minus key on the keyboard. We're still selected with our selection arrow. This time I remembered. And I'm going to use the arrow keys to just nudge this braille around till it lays on the shadow dots. That's close enough right there. 5 on my keyboard to zoom back out. And we have our print pages. So the next time when we need to change our print pages for making our real tactiles, the braille is already lined up with the shadow dots, and all we need to do is replace this braille by using our text tool with that little capital A. Do the same thing for the braille pages. That's it in the lower right of the page. We only need to reserve 4 cells. Oops, remember our text tool. 1, 2, 3, 4. Click on the lower left of that 4th cell. And we want to reserve up to the 100s for braille. So Shift 3 for the number indicator, A for 100, 1, and then J for 0, and then J for 0 again. click the Select tool up at the top of the toolbar. Zoom in, pressing 3 on the keyboard. Too far, press minus. Oh yeah, look at that. Let's nudge our Braille up so it matches our shadow dots. Ooh, almost exactly. Very nice. Press 5 on your keyboard to zoom out. We are done with the Braille page, and we're completely done with making our template. So let's lock this Braille page into place so that nothing moves now. Our traced tactile layer is our next layer that we're going to be working with, and that is locked right now. Let's unlock it. And let's hide the shadow dots. They'll still be there. We just want them out of the way for right now while I show you all these tools that we're going to work with next. So click the little eye icon. It closes. The shadow dots are still there. I'll open them again just to show you you don't have to worry. They're still there. We're just going to put them aside for right now. So close the little eye, click it. And as I said, we're going to move to our trace tactile layer now. So make sure that is selected. Our template is all done. So let's move on now to the tools. This tool column that I've been mentioning throughout the making of our template. As I said at the beginning of the first video, making the template requires you to know a fair amount about Inkscape already. But we're done with that now. So hopefully we never have to do this again. Just save this as your template. The next time you need to make a tactile graphic, you save as so that this template remains clear, but you have saved your tactile graphic as something else, a sphere or page 9 or whatever makes sense to you. But right now, let's move on to the tools. This is the fun part. It was kind of tedious making that template, but we're done now. Let's move on to the tools. The Selector Tool is the top of the column, the first one. We've been using that all along. It behaves pretty much as a regular pointer would. So it behaves as you would expect your mouse to behave. If you click on something, it will select it. You can click and drag. You can click and move. All those sorts of things. So for those sorts of functions, we would use our Select tool. Inkscape calls it Select and Transform Objects. That's a pretty good description of it. If you are not in text mode, you could use a keyboard shortcut of S if you prefer that. I'm a mouse person, so I'm using the mouse, but you can use S if you want. If you are in text mode and you click S, you're going to get an S. But if you're not in text mode and you click S or press S on your keyboard, you will get the Selector tool. So that's our first one. The next one down is called the Node tool. That one will make more sense as we go along. So I'm going to leave it alone for just now, but keep it in mind. It's a very important tool. It's called the Node tool. Next is our Rectangle tool. And again, if you're a keyboard person, you can press R. But I'm going to click it for now, that little square, and now my cursor changes yet again. You can see there's a tiny little black dot. That's where the cursor actually is, but our identification is this little gray square or rectangle to remind us that we're in rectangle mode now. So if I click and drag my mouse, I get a rectangle of some kind. If I want a perfect square, I can press the Control key and hold it as I click and drag my mouse. And then I can get dimensions of the perfect rectangle, the golden rectangle, excuse me, that the Greeks used to like, or I can make it a perfect square. If I want to grow a square from the middle, not the corners like I have been doing, I can press Shift and hold it down. And now watch, my square or rectangle will grow from the middle as opposed to growing as I drag the mouse from the upper left to the lower right. So I'm going to let go of both the keyboard and the mouse. And now I have 3 different rectangles, 2 of which are squares right now. I can go back up to the selection tool, click, and it selects the latest shape I just made, which is a square. I notice there are, see, 8 different bidirectional arrows that are straight right now. But if I click in the middle of this square, now I get bidirectional arrows, including these curved arrows on the corners, and that lets me spin my square or rectangle however I want it. So let's just try and make this kind of a diamond shape there. And then I just clicked anywhere on the workspace to make all those arrows go away. So that's what we can do with the rectangle tool. I'm going to now draw a marquee. I have my selection arrows clicked. I'm going to draw a very light outline box. It's called a marquee, or a box, bounding box. And then let go of my arrow, my mouse, excuse me. It selected all 3 of my objects that I've just drawn: the rectangle, a square, and a diamond. Press delete to make it go away, because now I want to show you the next tool. The next tool down the left-hand column is the Ellipse Tool. And with the Ellipse Tool, I can also make perfect circles, just like I can make perfect squares with the Rectangle tool. I can also make arcs and chords with this tool. So let's experiment with this one. Click on that. And again, I have a little dot on the upper left. That's where my mouse actually is. And the identifier is a little oval. So I'm going to just draw some random ellipses here. I'll make a wide one and a tall, narrow one. And then I'll press Control on my keyboard and drag to make a perfect circle. Click anywhere in the workspace. So now I have 3 objects on my workspace, and these are the ellipses. Suppose with the circle, I actually want to make an arc out of that circle. So I'm going to click on my selection tool, click on the circle. Actually, and now I'm going to click on the node tool. This is where nodes start to make a little bit more sense. When I've drawn the circle shape, there are 3 nodes. I don't know why there aren't 4, one other one at the bottom, but there are 3. One is a circle, the other 2 are squares. Those shapes, the little squares for the nodes and the circle, I don't know what those shapes mean, but I'm sure I will discover it later on. I do know, however, that if I click and drag click on the little round node, a node is like a changing point for any shape that you draw. So I click and hold on that little circle, it turns kind of yellow, orangish. And if I click and if I drag on the inside of the circle, on the inside of that bounding box that I showed you, I get a chord. And if I don't want any fill, I don't want any gray fill, I just want the outline, I can go, so there are several ways to do this, but the easiest way I've found so far is to go down to the status bar at the bottom of your screen. In the lower left, there's called little colored boxes. There's a gray one right now for fill and a black one for stroke. I do, by the way, recommend having some sort of stroke even on gray shapes like this, because it helps define the edges a bit more for the fingers. But for right now, suppose I don't want any fill in there at all. So I go to the color bar, and at the far left, there's an X. That means no fill, nothing at all in there. So I'm going to click that for now. And now I just have an outline. And I can click on, drag on that little circle some more if I need to adjust my chord. This is also where I'll click on the circle, the ellipse tool again. Remember that the tools controls bar at the top changes with each tool that I click on. For right now, I have some controls for this Ellipse tool. There are 4 on the right of the tools controls bar. And with this, I can change to a slice. I can switch to an arc. I can make a chord, or I can make a circle, a full circle again. So let's do a full circle for now because I want to show you now how to make a slice. I've shown you, or no, excuse me, we have been making a slice. No, I have to think. I've been showing you a slice, a chord, and an arc. Let's now go to full circle, node tool again, click on and drag, click and hold on that little circle icon. Now drag around the outside of that bounding box, and now I get a slice. So before I had a chord and a arc, now I have a slice. So you could do that too, and you can fill it with a gray again if you like. I like 40% gray on that color bar, so I'm going to click that right now, and now I have a filled in slice. And again, if I click on the ellipse tool and I want to draw a circle, I'm going to get a slice again because that's the mode that the program is in. But again, I can click on that full circle icon at the tools control bar, and boom, I have a full circle. And I can change the stroke if I don't like that big thickness. If I want to change it into a thin line again, I can do that. And actually, that is a very good segue for me to talk about fills and strokes right now. So before I go to the next tool, stars and polygons, I want to talk about fills and strokes. So we're going to take a little detour. Let's just focus on that circle for right now. And we're going to go to Object up on the menu bar. Click that. The second option down is Fill and Stroke. Click that. That gives us another tab over on the right foot. So we have 3 dialog boxes open right now for different tabs. We have Layers, Text and Font, which actually I can get rid of right now because we've already set the default as Swell Braille at 24 points. So I'm going to click the little X on the tab to make that go away. So now I have Layers and Fill and Stroke. That's all. This looks really complicated, but again, remember, Inkscape is designed for graphic designers. So we don't need to pay attention to any line of this except for the K. So the CMYK down the left. And then A is, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's the background, and we don't care about that right now. We have our gray set to 40, you'll notice. So this is another way, a fancy way of changing the gray fill if you want. You can go up and down with that plus and minus, but right now it's set to 40. That's okay for now. Now I want to draw your attention to the little icons just below the tabs. Just like the color bar, we have a little X at the far right, which means no paint. Paint is what Inkscape calls the fill or the stroke nature of the stroke, with the stroke being the outline. So we are interested only as tactile graphic artists. We want either no paint, flat color, which is what we've been working with the gray fill. Ignore the next 3 because they have to do with meshes and gradients. We might be interested in patterns. Swatch has to do with colors, never mind that. And the question mark means Inkscape can't figure out what you're doing. So let's ignore that for now. So again, we're only interested in the X at the far left, flat color, and pattern. Let's click on pattern because we've been working with flat color already with the 40% gray. So pattern, click on that. And then we have, you notice that circle turned to stripes. That is because with our pattern fill, we have a long drop-down menu. Let's click on that arrow to get the drop-down menu. And if I scroll, you see this is a very long list of possibilities for pattern fills according to Inkscape. Most of these, the greatest majority of these, will not work for tactile graphics. So, but as a starting point, let's click on the stripes 1-to-1 ratio. It's already selected actually for us, but let's just do that. So now we have stripes 1-to-1, meaning the gaps between the black stripes is just as wide as the stripes themselves. This is not going to work for the fingers, so we need to adjust it. How are we going to do that? Well, let's go to the node tool as we have that circle selected, and it appeared, maybe you missed it, it's really easy to do that, but way up in the upper left corner of your workspace, outside of the printing area, 3 little shapes appeared when we clicked on the node tool. One is the X. I don't know what that is yet. I'll find out later, but I'm pretty sure I can ignore that for now. Then we have a little circle and a little square. For right now, let's just do the square. And I'm going to click and drag it to the left, and you see that the stripes in my circle get narrower and narrower. And I just keep going until I find something that I think might work for the fingers. Remember, your eyes are not going to do it, but that's what we have for right now. But we'll have to test it in an actual PF production to make sure that we can feel it with our fingers. Right now, I'm trying to get something that has black on either end of the circle, the left and the right. And it's a little tricky. There, that's pretty good. I'm going to leave that for now and try it out, see if that works. I can also, this works better if I do a square actually. Let me try that for a moment. Let me get rid of these circles. Click on my selection tool, draw a marquee all the way around all of the objects, press delete on my keyboard. Okay, I'm going to show you a square. That works better. There. Okay, flat color, yes, and node tool. Node tool. And click on the square. Excuse my clicking around here for a moment. As you can see, you do not need to be an expert to run this program. I'm still learning this myself. So for some reason, I'm not getting my little nodes here. I'm trying to figure out why. Okay. You have to click the pattern button and then the node tool to get those 3 little shapes in the upper left of the workspace that I was just talking about. So I'm back to my 1-to-1 stripes. And by the way, another thing that I really, really recommend is to start with a blank sheet of paper. Go open a different file, start a new document, and then play around with your patterns. That is because once I set my pattern, there's a way to do that I hope I remember to show you later. Once I set my pattern, it becomes a part of this big long list on the left, and it's just a series of numbers. There are no words to it. So you have these numbered patterns that you can't get rid of. They're impossible to get rid of. You can rename them if you know anything about XML. I do not yet. So if I'm just going to have a series of numbers for every experiment that I did. I don't want that until I know I have a pattern that I want to keep. I want to work with a entirely different document. But just for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to show you here what you can do with it. So again, I have my square and the little square icon in the upper left of the workspace. If I hover over it, it turns kind of yellow orangish. I'm going to click and drag it until I get something I like. And again, I'm going to try to get something that's black on the left and the right part of the square so that the square is definition. I'm honestly not sure if that is necessary, but it just it seems like a reasonable place to start. So trying to get black, 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 and something that's going to work for the fingers as well. It might take me a moment. I'm just clicking and dragging the little square here while I do this. Very tricky. If I go too far to the left, then I'll have the gaps between the stripes won't be wide enough. I know that because this is going to puff up, remember, in a PF machine or a heat fuser machine is the generic term. So these are going to puff up and the stripes are going to run into each other. So I know I don't want too narrow stripes. Keep trying. There. Oh, good. Okay. There we go. We have a square with some stripes that they might or might not work for the fingers. We're just going to try. It's an experiment. So now we have a square with some vertical stripes, and this might be a pattern worth keeping. If so, I'm going to show you how, but I'm not going to actually do it because, like I said, it's going to turn into a series of numbers in that drop-down menu. But if I like what I have, I can go to Object and then down almost to the middle to Pattern. A submenu comes up and I want Objects to Pattern. Click that if you like it, and it will make that pattern permanent. I do emphasize permanent in the pattern fill drop-down menu. I don't want to do that right now, so I'm going to click on my workspace to make those menus go away. So that's what the little square in the upper left of the workspace does after I've clicked pattern on the dialog box and the node tool in the toolbar. Let's talk a bit now about the circle. The circle, the square went left to right when we clicked and drag, but the circle goes up or down. And watch what happens when I drag up to on the circle. Watch what happens to the stripes. Oh, look at that. They turn diagonal. So that means we can have, if I play around with it a bit, I can have perfectly 45-degree stripes. That's pretty good right there. So I have black, excuse me, on the upper left, lower left and upper right of the stripes. The stripes are diagonal. They're not quite 45%, but I could keep going and play around with this. So that's what happens when I drag the circle up. I'm going to click and drag that little circle node down, and now the stripes changed direction completely. In fact, I could probably make horizontal stripes if I kept going, drag down, all the way down. If I played around with it enough, I'm sure I could do it. I've done it in the past, but it's a little tricky. But right now, I'm just clicking and dragging that little circle down until I get stripes. So I had stripes going down to the lower left. I can click and have them go to up to the upper left if I want. So I have two different diagonal stripes. And I can also make horizontal stripes if I play around with it enough. So that's what those little nodes do. And it's just an experiment that you'll have to do on your own until you get something that you like, something that works for your student. And then if you like those patterns and you want to keep them, you can go to Object, Pattern, and then Objects to Pattern. But I don't want to do that right now. So that's what I want to say about patterns. I also want to show you a couple of other patterns that might possibly work beyond stripes in this preset list of patterns that Inkscape has. So if I scroll almost all the way down to the bottom, I have checkerboard. Ignore all of the white patterns. That's if you have colors, then you'd stripe white and a color, kind of like a tent awning. And we definitely don't want that for tactile graphics. So avoid all of the ones that say white, but checkerboard might possibly be one that you can use. And again, you can manipulate that once you click the node tool, and then you get these three little nodes up in the upper left of the workspace, the little X, the circle, and the square. Checkerboard might work. Scrolling back down again, polka dot medium might possibly work. I'll show you that. You can manipulate that slightly, but not as much as the other two patterns, the stripes and the checkerboard. And notice that my nodes now are all over the place for this. My circle node is about well, it's almost in the middle of the top of the workspace. My square node is in the upper left of the square itself, and that X in the corner of the workspace. So polka dot medium might possibly work. Just try it out, see what happens. Another one that might possibly work is wavy. Again, you can manipulate that with those nodes in the upper left of the workspace. The rest of these won't work at all, especially these textures like sand and cloth, old paint. Those will not work at all for tactile graphics. All these other stripe patterns are not good for tactile graphics. So stick with stripes 1-to-1 and play around with what until you get what you want. You possibly checkerboard, possibly polka dots medium, and possibly wavy. That's it for this entire list. That's all I want to say for the patterns now. Let's make this go away. So I'm going to click my tool, my selection tool. It's selected. I know that because it has all these arrows around it. Press enter on or delete on my keyboard to make it go away. Now I want to go back to my layers, trace tactile layer, and I'm going to continue on with the tools going down the left on the screen. So I've shown you the selection tool, a little bit about the node tool, the rectangle tool, the ellipse tool. The next one is the stars and polygons tool. This one is plenty to talk about as well. There's a lot that I show in the handout. I'll show you a little bit now in this demo session. So I'm going to click this star. The first thing I want to show you is that the tools commands bar again has changed because I've clicked a different tool. You'll notice that my cursor now again has a little gray dot in the upper left and a star to remind me which tool I'm using right now. But I want to show you on the tools control bar, there is new, meaning I'm about to draw a new shape. There's the polygon tool that looks like a pentagon, and then the star tool. Right now, I'm going to click the star tool because I want to show you that first. I can click and drag my cursor to make all sorts of stars. And then if I click my node tool, I get some manipulation points here. I get just two with this star tool. I get one in kind of one of the grooves and another one at one of the points. In both of these, I'm sure there's a difference, but as far as I can tell right now, they change the nature of the points and grooves. So I haven't figured out the difference, but that's what you use to change the star. If you want something other than short, like this one, like it's short arms, it's kind of balancing on one point right now. If I want to make it a flat bottom, I can click the selection tool, or as if you're a keyboard person, click in the middle of the star again and then I can spin it around by clicking and dragging on one of the corner bidirectional arrows until I get 2 points at the bottom. And notice there's a bounding box around the square. It's very light. I'm not sure you can see it in the video, but it's a dashed blue line around the square. So those are my, that's the area that the shape is taking. Let go of my mouse. All these arrows and points show up, but what I want to show you is the nodes. So I'm going to go back up to the node tool. And again, I have a node in one of the grooves and a node in one of the points. Let's click on the one at the point now. I'm just going to click and drag my arrow. I'm just going to go kind of diagonally in it now to show you what can happen with the star. I can make straight arms before I had, well, the arms weren't straight. They're cute and short. I can make them be long and straight. If I keep going, I can make a really huge pointy star like that. Click the selection tool again and click on the star just in the middle of it. Because what I want to show you, oh, maybe it's here on the star and some polygon tool. That's it. Okay. The corners. Right now they're set at 5. I can change this up or down. So this is how I make triangles. I make press the minus sign a couple of times until I get 3 corners. I'm on the stars one, so it's kind of looking really funny right now. But if I click on the Polygon tool at the top of that tool's control bar, there's my triangle. And again, I can click my node tool to spin it around, or no, excuse me, the selection tool, and then click in the middle of the triangle and spin it around until I get a flat bottom triangle if that's what I want. Okay, stars and polygon tool again, click. So that was my star tool. Stay with the polygon tool right now. Say I want to go back up to, let's make an octagon. 4, 5, 6, hexagon, 7, whatever that's called. Here's my octagon. And say I want to make it have a flat bottom. So click on my selection tool, click in the middle of the octagon, click on the corner bidirectional arrow, spin it around carefully until I get a flat bottom with that bounding box. Try again. There, that's about as careful as I can be right there. Okay, and then you can fill it with your different patterns. You can fill it with this 40% gray or the polka dots or stripes, what have you. You can also make some white space, which is getting fancy. It's too much for this session, but you can make a text box and put in STOP in there and make this a stop sign if you like. So that's pretty much what I want to show you for this, the stars and polygon tool. There's a lot that can go into it, but it's too much for the session right now. So in the handout, I also show you how to have kind of rounded corners if you want rounded corners on your shape, but that's too technical for this session. Let's now move on. I'm going to, my selection tool is already selected. I know that because my cursor is a black arrow. And I'm going to draw a bounding box or marquee, click and drag around all my objects, press delete on my keyboard to make them go away so I can show you the next tool. But notice on this tools bar, we have the stars and polygons tool. The next tool looks like it ought to be really handy for creating cubes on 2D paper, but please ignore it for now. I don't think it can ever be used. Maybe I'll figure out a way later on, but I've been using Illustrator with Adobe Illustrator, which also has this tool, and so far I have just avoided it like the plague. So don't use this. You're better off drawing a cube on your own. I'll show you how in a moment. The spiral tool, which is next, generally I never use this unless I would really want to show a student what a spiral looks like, or maybe draw a snail shell. So I just clicked on the spiral tool. Notice my cursor changes. If I click and drag, I get a really cool looking spiral, but I can't imagine, like I said, how I would use it in Tactile. But maybe you, as a teacher of the visually impaired, might have a use for it. You might want to make that a thicker line. Oh, I should show you that. So that you can have the student trace around in a spiral. Maybe it's a pre-tactile exercise to learn how to follow curved lines. I don't know. Let's go back up to our fill and stroke tab at the right of our dialog box area. I forgot to show you stroke, so I'm going to show you that now. So we worked with the fill tab. Next is stroke paint and stroke style. So let's go to stroke style for the moment. And right now we have the width in inches. I recommend putting it into points. And I like to have 1.5 for point as a starting point. You can use whatever works for you or your student. So there, I have a line that's darker and therefore will raise higher than what we had before, but it's not too dark so that it will turn into a kind of like a shag carpet. If you overheat with a PF machine or heat fuser machine, it's too much darkness, too much heat is going to make it into this weird shag carpet look, and you don't want that. So you don't want to go too dark, but you want dark enough that it's going to be easy for the student to follow. So that's how you would change the thickness of the stroke. I recommend points and then 1.5 as a starting point. I could also make this into dashes. And here again, we have a long drop-down menu, most of which are not going to work for tactile designers. So we have it as a solid line right now. That's good. One of these dashed lines might should work for you. You might have to experiment. I think this dotted line would work. You can barely see the difference right now, but I'm sure you can manipulate the distance between the dashes and the spaces between the dashes. This one might work as a dashed line, so a dotted line. Don't use dashed lines for curved lines. I'm just showing you the methods, but please don't make a dashed spiral line. Back to dashes. I think that's about it. There is this dash and dot line that you may possibly find a use for, but it's not really recommended for tactile graphics. So what we're left on is solid line, possibly a dotted line, and possibly a dash line. That's it for this entire long drop-down menu. Let's go back to solid line because that's much better. And now I want to get rid of the spiral. Selection tool and then delete on the keyboard. The next tool down from the spiral tool is calligraphy. Avoid that unless you truly want to. No, excuse me. Spiral tool and then the pen tool, which is also called I'm going to mispronounce it probably, but it's the Bezier tool. It's easier to say pen, and most people call it the pen tool, so I'm going to call it the pen tool. Notice again, you can press B if you're a keyboard person, but for right now, this is the pen tool. This is also a super important tool. So far, I would say after the selection tool and the node tool, this pen tool is probably the most important tool you'll need. So I'm going to click that. My cursor changes again to the point of a pen with a little gray dot, which is where my cursor actually is. And with this, I can draw all sorts of lines. I click and drag, then let go of the mouse when I get to my end point of my line. But notice the line is going to follow my pen tool wherever I take it. It's a red line right now. I don't want that. My line is done. It's the blue line right here. That's all I want. So I'm going to press Enter on my keyboard just to stop my line. It all went away. Why did it do that? I will try again. Click and click. Okay, click and click. That turns the line green. That's where I want. I do not want this red line. I think what I had before was a curved line, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. But no, so I don't want this line following me around. It's like I have gum on my shoe. I can't get rid of it. So press Enter on the keyboard. There we go. Now we get a line. It stopped. The line isn't following me around anymore. Suppose I want another line. Click the pen tool. I'm going to go top to bottom now. So click, drag my mouse, click to end it, enter on my keyboard to stop. But now that's the same thickness as the line I just drew. So when the student is going along, they might say they're starting at the far left of the first line I drew. They're going along and then they hit a crossroads and they don't know which way to go. One way that's going to help is to make one of the lines thicker. So I'm going to make that second line thicker. And the best practice is to make lines at least two points thicker than any other line around it in order for the fingers to detect the difference between one line and the other. So the first line I drew was 1.5. I'm going to go back up to my dialog box for the Fill and Stroke tab. Stroke style. Points right now is only 0.75. That's no good. The first line was 1.5. So add 2 points to that. That makes 3.5. So just enter 3.5 on my keyboard. I have points. Enter. And now I can see that I have a thick line and a thin line. Banna actually goes further and says you need a little bit of white space around one of the lines where they join so that the student knows that, oops, that one's broken and it continues on. This thick line should be followed all the way through, etc. There are all sorts of guidelines about that in the guidelines and standards for tactile graphics on the Banna website. That's brailleauthority.org website. So, but for right now, I have two different lines. Suppose I want to, excuse me, I'm accidentally added a line here. So I have two lines right now. Suppose I want to add something to one of the lines, and I can go back to the pen tool, click it, excuse me, the node tool, and click that. So now I have, and click on, say, the first line I drew. Two nodes appear along with the bounding box. Two nodes at the beginning end and at the end. I can add nodes or delete nodes by going up to my Tools Commands bar up at the top. There are all sorts of icons up there, most of which you can ignore. But for right now, you can delete a selected node. You can insert a selected node. Ignore the ones that in the middle. Then here we have, you can make a selected node into a corner if you actually accidentally made it into a curve. Let's come back to that. These will make more sense later on. Just one moment. So I've added, I have this line here, and now I want to add part of it. So I click on a node, say the end node, and my pen tool. And now I can add a line, click. I'm done. Click enter on my keyboard, and now I have kind of a line with a corner here and a line that crosses it. So that's how I can draw straight lines. I can also draw perfectly straight lines by pressing and holding Control on my keyboard as I make my lines. So I'm pressing and holding Control on my keyboard right now. Click, and now I can make a perfectly straight horizontal line. And also, as I drag around, Inkscape will jump the line around to perfect 15-degree increments, if you like. So you could do perfectly horizontal, perfectly diagonal going down to the lower right, or perfectly vertical. So I'm going to do a perfectly horizontal line right now. Let go of my Control key on my keyboard. Click. Oh, don't. Control Z to undo that. Continue holding Control on your keyboard. Click on the line to make an endpoint. It's still following me around, so I don't want that. Press Enter on my keyboard, and now I have a perfectly straight line. With my node tool, click. I can click on a node and make it shorter or longer as I like. And if I want to keep it perfectly horizontal, press and hold the Control key as I do that, and I will get shorter or longer lines as I like. So that's how you do straight lines. I'm going to show you now how to do curved lines, and that will be all for our session today. Drawing a bounding box, a marquee around all of my objects, press Delete on my keyboard to make those go away. Click on the pen tool again. Now I'm going to click and drag as I draw my line to make a curved line. So click and drag, and wherever I want the curve to change direction, I'm going to click and drag again. Don't worry about being perfect right now. You can just click and drag. I'll show you how you can change things later on. So let's be done with my line right now. Click Enter on my keyboard. I have a really weird, wild looking curved line. But if I click on my node tool, a node appears, a tacking point, as if you will, kind of tacking down a piece of string or a rubber band wherever I change direction. And if I click on the node, any node, I get these things called handles. They're straight things with kind of boxes at the end of them. They're like bike handles on your bike. I can click and drag on these nodes and change the shape of my curve. I can also make so I can click longer and make the curve more pronounced, or shorter and make a softer curve. I can click and drag around to change the direction of the curve. And I'm sure there's a way to change both handles at the same time, but I don't know what that is right now. Even our starting point had a handle. And so even if I made a mistake at the beginning, or I say I just want to edit it to change the nature of the shape, I can do that. So here's where I want to go back up to the tools control bar. Click my pen tool to show you. Hang on while I do this. There. Okay. Selection, no. Pen tool. Nodes, yes, here we go. This is what I wanted to show you. So here is where we can add or delete nodes at the upper left of the tools control bar. Ignore the join selected nodes, break path that's selected. This is far more complicated and maybe more than we will ever use as tactographic designers. Join selected endnotes with a new segment might possibly come into use later on. Delete the segment, ignore those. But what we want to look at right now is make a selected node a corner and make a selected node smooth. So I'm just going to click this a node. Well, I'll click this one. This will show you better, I think. So I click on this node in the middle, top middle, and say, oh, I didn't really mean that for it to be a curve. I want that to be a corner. I can click this icon up at the tools command bar. Click that. And now my node is a corner. It's not immediately obvious, but if I move the handles around, you can see that now it's become a corner. It stops and abruptly changes direction instead of making a smooth curve. Or say I made it a corner, I forgot to drag as I was clicking. That's okay. You can go up to the icons and make selected node smooth. Click, and now it's smooth, and I can adjust the handles however I need to make the curve that I want. The other to make selected nodes symmetric, or maybe that's something that might come, maybe that's what I was talking about before. Make selected nodes auto smooth, not sure what that means. A bunch of other icons that are for later on, but for right now, we can make curved lines and we can make straight lines. We can add nodes, we can delete nodes, we can play around with them. It just takes experimenting and gaining control, kind of like writing that anecdotal bike. You just have to kind of play around with it and see what happens. But for right now, I'm going to make all of that go away and finish our session for today. We'll continue on next, continuing with the tools bar as we go down in session 3. Thank you for coming and listening.